Right, so jQuery is our first layer of abstraction that we're going to be looking at this semester. What it does is that it abstracts the browser so that it provides you with a consistent API throughout different vendors, right? So that before jQuery, you would have to write lots and lots of switch cases that check to see where you were running. Were you running on IE, on Chrome? Where were you running on, right? So because each also the versions, what version of that particular browser were you running? And depending on that, you have to do things that are slightly different. Because remember, your code here is not running on your framework, right? It's being downloaded by somebody that lives halfway across the world, right? And is being executed on their browsers. And you can't guarantee anything about that browser, right? You can't. Typically, you don't want to impose anything on those folks, right? Maybe you can impose something if it's a limited application. Maybe that it's facing into an enterprise, right? If you have maybe for administrators or for a small audience, maybe you can impose and say, well, no, it has to be the latest version of Chrome, all right? But if it's an application that is for the masses, right, that it's meant to be used by millions of people, you can't guarantee anything, right? So typically your code would have to have lots of, would have to be able to survive out there in the jungle. So after having, developers after having written, thousands, millions of lines of code dealing with various versions and various vendors, they started writing their own libraries that would figure this out on their own, right? So they abstracted it so that if you wanted to add something append something to the content, it would do it. It would hide the if and else's and switches that would deal with the different vendors, and that's exactly what jQuery did. It standardized this, right? So that you have a single set of functions that work the same across all vendors, all browsers. Okay, and most libraries, Angular, React, at the bottom, they use libraries such as jQuery to actually talk to the DOM, right? So they're already built on top of this abstraction layer. So let's look at this first. Let's peel off this first abstraction layer, right? Let's use it to see how it works. And just extrapolate how you would actually build something like React on top of this. Okay. So jQuery, I invite you to go to the jQuery website and become familiar with how it's organized. The documentation is very, very good. We're certainly just going to scratch the surface. It's a huge library. It's somewhat redundant. There's like two, three different ways of doing the same thing. We're just gonna use a minimal subset of the library. So I invite you to go there. Another particular library that certainly will be of interest to you is jQuery user interface. Has lots and lots of really cool widgets and date pickers and things that you can reuse very nicely. Also, there's one jQuery mobile that is specific targeting for smaller screens and unit testing and whatnot. So anyway, certainly worth a read. So anyway, jQuery. So jQuery can be either downloaded and install locally in your perhaps in a JS directory. The latest version is 3.2.1, earlier versions would support older browsers. Newer versions are starting to drop off some of the older browsers, right, and only support a subset of the browsers. So you can either install it locally, right, and have a copy locally, or instead, better yet, use a CDN. Remember, I mentioned last week that a CDN was always a better option, right? Especially if you're going to production, right? That you're using from a source that is probably will be much more popular than yours. So anyway, the syntax of jQuery is very easy. when you do load the jQuery library, it declares a single function. It declares a single function at the global space, even though we told you not to do that. When you are as important as jQuery, then you can take those liberties. When you become as famous as Angular and jQuery, by all means, declare something global with your own name and whatnot. All right. So anyway, so it declares this single function. It's a very powerful function. Right? It's a function that like the name suggests, right? What the name suggests here is that it's a query, meaning it's questioning, it's doing something. It's a query in the sense like you would be a database query, like a select statement. Yes? When you do a select statement on a database, you say, well, retrieve for me the following data from this data set with the following criteria. Right? Retrieve for me all the employees that were employed in these dates and are making this date range from these offices and whatnot. Yes? So that's a query, and you're querying a data set. Okay? What jQuery does is similar. It queries the HTML document, meaning, hey, there's this data that is spread over an HTML document. Fetch me all the elements on the HTML document that meet this criteria. Okay? Fetch for me all the elements who have the following class or have the following ID, or all the elements that are under UL, LI, A. Retrieve for me all those elements. Right? And once you have them, I want to manipulate them as a set. I want to turn them all red. I want to change all their fonts. Right? I want to hide them all. I want to move them from the top, move them to the bottom. I want to make them clickable. Right? That if I click this, it hides that one. Right? You can manipulate. You can query these things, retrieve from the DOM, and then bind all these behaviors. All right, so I'm going to create a document so that we can play around with jQuery. So let's create a directory here, and this will be jQuery. And we'll declare here an input file, index.html. And we're going to do a script, and we're going to point to a CDN it's Google's CDN, right? That Google hosts, all the libraries are available at Google, and it's a popular CDN. So there it is. So I now have jQuery installed.